Alright, here we go. Let's take a look at lie number 6. How Indians influenced modern America. The myth. After the natives helped the pilgrims get through that first winter, and again there are multiple Thanksgivings, all playing nice disappeared and so did they. And no, it's always more complicated. The truth. A settler defecting to join native society was quite common, so common that it became a major issue for a lot of the colonial leaders, and laws had to be passed to start to prevent, basically, whites running away to join tribes. Some examples are the settlers in the first English colony that failed. It fell apart because a lot of the settlers in Roanoke, Virginia, defected to what is likely a Native American tribe. We're not certain on this one. All we know is they settled in Virginia and Roanoke, and about 5 years later, when Europeans went back to kind of check on the village, nothing was left behind except for a carving in the tree, and the carving was Croatoan. And that's one of the local tribes, so it's likely that they ran away. There was no evidence of a struggle or battle, and it's likely they just simply joined up with the tribe because they weren't doing too well on their own. Other examples are Hernando de Soto had to post guards to keep his men and women from defecting to a lot of the native societies. People kept running away because they weren't surviving too well on their own. Pilgrims, in case that they were so scared of native influence that eventually they even outlawed the wearing of long hair out of fear that people would join up. Ben Franklin noted that no European who has tasted savage life can afterwards bear to live in our societies. And Indians used quite a lot, but savage as well, as unfortunate as the use of that word is. Savage is also used as a descriptor for a lot of native societies. So the idea that once somebody has tried that different lifestyle, they really can't go back. And so it must have been pretty good, or at least more freeing in many ways, in that they had food, and that they also had a different outlook on life and had different rules, and it appealed to quite a lot of Europeans. Admiration of native culture. Again, Franklin was very wordy, he's a talkative guy. He believed that Indian societies provided greater opportunities for happiness than European cultures. There were less limitations. A couple examples when we showed this is how native society is emblematic of freedom. In Boston Tea Party, they didn't dress up as natives, as Mohawk Indians, just because the idea is it's common protesting gear because they have more freedom, and that's part of what they're fighting for during the American Revolution, is to enhance that freedom. Political cartoons often would use Indians to represent us, to represent the colonial side, and colonial soldiers would dress up like Indians in many cases, especially early years when we didn't have uniforms at all. When fighting the British, native was used as a symbol of freedom. But also just in matters of warfare, it was just easier camouflage too. Another big example is the Iroquois Confederacy, and more comes on this here and there. Historians think the Iroquois Confederacy had a direct influence on the U.S. Constitution. The colonists came from European countries that had spent most of the time as monarchies. We really haven't had a democracy since ancient Greece and a republic since ancient Rome. So largely we're used to monarchies in Europe. And much of their resources were fighting religious wars against each other, monarchies and different religions fighting each other over the last several hundred years. They initially tried to set up the colonies exactly like their old monarchies, like Western Europe. A bunch of small infighting nations stacked on top of each other. And colony versus colony, just the same thing that was happening over in Europe. But Franklin, again, Franklin's a wordy guy, he noted in a letter about the failure to integrate. It would be a strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union and be able to execute it in such a manner as that it has subsisted ages and appears insoluble, and that a like union should be impracticable for 10 or a dozen English colonies. So he's using the example of the Iroquois Six Nations, where it's 6 nations that are able to come together, unite, to kind of form something similar to a republic, where the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Tuscarora, Oneida, and Mohawk peoples work together to form kind of a common defense alliance and republic. And the early English colonies had severe difficulties uniting. It took quite a bit. It took 100 years or so for us to realize that we were American and not individual colonies instead. And so we started to kind of look at that model and try to figure out how the Iroquois can do it. And again, frankly, we kept referring to them as savages, something lesser. Then the English should be able to as well. And so they're seen as a model in many different ways. So to kind of close out, Living on an Apocalypse, I love that title. It was noted that the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, one of the founding ideas, includes freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? Big ideas in our Constitution, separation of power and government, and checks and balances. And so they've created a government very similar to our own, and then we're starting to think, well, when they're writing our Constitution, were they influenced by these ideas already in the New York area? And one of the strangest legacies of America's founding is our own national obsession with the apocalypse. 2012, everybody's saying that there's the end of the world, and we all love zombie movies and the ideas of the end of the world. We love the apocalypse as long as nobody acknowledges the truth. It's not a mythical event, that we live directly on top of one. We're living one. An example, all the canals around town. You can see in this map some of the older canals versus canals that were created 500 years ago. But that's the darker idea that we're living on top of something that was already created, it was already gone. And so it's a darker way, and that's another reason why a lot of these myths keep going out there. Is it's a sad reality when we start to look at our own history. All right, and that's our 6 lies.